Washington in public office is going to get, you know, hit with criticism. That's the nature of our democracy. That's the way it should work. And you know, one of the things that I know is true here in Allegheny County and true across the country is that they sure wish that some of this you know, criticism was a little more constructive and that we were more focused on the lives of ordinary people.
Eric Holder has made history in more than a few places during his career. He's also been the recipient of numerous awards and also been the target of a number of investigations. He is now the 9th longest tenured Attorney General in the history of the United States and wields considerable power that can affect the lives of every American. But he finds himself now embroiled in a few controversies with those on all sides wondering if he has overstepped his reach and put himself in the middle of debates no AG should be involved in. Welcome to MidPoint. He is the co-author of a new book about the Attorney General entitled Obama's Enforcer, Eric Holder's Justice Department. Also a Newsmax contributor and correspondent for National Review Online, John Funn joins us from New York. John, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you, Ed.
John, we look at this and there are those people who believe, as I noted, that Eric Holder has just overstepped himself. Is this something that he has done his entire career? Does this recent series of controversies just point to what Holder is, or is this completely out of character?
Well, his early career was very promising, and I talked to many people who worked with him in the Justice Department who said he was a solid prosecutor. But starting in the Clinton administration, there was a turn. He became the number 2, the deputy to Janet Reno, the Attorney General in Bill Clinton's second term. And apparently his task was to make sure that there were no new special prosecutors appointed, like Ken Starr and the others going after Clinton scandals. There were new prosecutors appointed. And under his watch, there were 2 very controversial decisions he had a big role in. He released 16 Puerto Rican terrorists, pardoned them, and these were people who had committed crimes, including murder. They hadn't even asked for a pardon, but they got a pardon, and there was a lot of speculation that it was linked to Hillary Clinton's run for the Senate in New York, which has a large Puerto Rican community. And the second thing was the infamous pardon of Mark Rich, the international fugitive from justice who had been accused of dealing with Iran when Iran was a sworn enemy of the United States and was holding American embassy personnel hostage.
John, is there a feeling from some people, and what you're talking about, and when you talk about political connections as well, that Eric Holder is someone who is easily swayed by political influences?
All I can tell you is that an Attorney General has 2 jobs. On the one hand, he has to enforce the president's prosecutorial priorities. That's fine. That's why we elect presidents with different priorities. On the other hand, he has to uphold the rule of law to make sure that the law isn't used as a club to punish enemies and reward friends. At every point when there's been a choice between going with the Obama administration and going with something that is highly political, he seems to have veered, highly in accord with the rule of law, he seems to have veered into the direction of the Obama administration and politicizing the Justice Department.
The comment that he made about racial animus, in writing the book and then leading up to this, did you get the thought process that this was in line with how he has felt throughout his career, that this is something that really is embodied in him?
Not in his early career. He was raised in New York City, won scholarships to very good high schools, said he was in a very middle-class neighborhood, never experienced any racial discrimination in the 50s and 60s. This attitude seems to have come, I think, partly because of his marriage. He married a civil rights activist from the South who had deep grievances from that period of Jim Crow, and he seems to have embodied the race-conscious mentality of many radicals inside the Justice Department. I mean, he recently made the most astonishing statement. Even though the Supreme Court has said that affirmative action is a temporary program and we should look towards the day when we can go to Martin Luther King's vision of when you're judged by the content of your character rather than your color of your skin, he has said affirmative action should last forever. It's going to be a permanent part of American life, and he actually rhetorically asked, I don't ask when affirmative action ends, I ask when it will begin.
John, were you able to uncover, at least get a good sense of what the people in the Justice Department feel about Eric Holder, those who are close to him, those who work with him, and those who are able to deal with the man on a day-to-day basis as to what kind of a person he is and how he's running that department?
Well, there's a lot of chaos in the department, a lot of conflicting signals. A lot of lawyers are unhappy with the constant zigs and zags of policy. On the other hand, Holder has a very strong cadre of loyalists that he has appointed, and they believe in him very strongly and have stood by him. But the best way to look at how the Justice Department is run is to look at how outside observers have looked at it. The Supreme Court, Holder has to go and argue the administration's many expansive views of executive power, like Obamacare and like recess appointments. And 13 times in the last 2 years, 13 times the Supreme Court has unanimously struck down Holder's position on executive power and overreach. And that has included the 2 Obama appointees in the Supreme Court, Elena Kagan and Sonia Sotomayor.
Is it not fair to say, you used the word overreach, and again, this is a word that we have been using for a couple of weeks here now, certainly in light of what the president has done and how the Supreme Court has ruled against him in a couple of cases. Certainly the NLRB case comes to mind right away. Is this just simply endemic of this administration, and no matter whether it's President Obama or whomever, and certainly to Holder that basically takes care of what the president wants, that it is a thinking that we can overreach? They can't stop us.
Well, presidents have enormous power, and they're always tempted to become frustrated with Congress and to try to circumvent Congress. Richard Nixon most famously did that, and he was called the imperial president by many of the people who are Holder's defenders today. Well, Holder and Obama have basically become an imperial attorney general and an imperial president, but the liberals are supporting them. Rather than the rule of law, they seem to be celebrating the rule of men. And it was wrong with Nixon, and it's wrong with Obama, and I think the courts are coming to agree on that.
When we talk about Holder and what he has done at this point, give us a sense, if you will, of many of the decisions he's made. Of course, he's come under tremendous fire for a lot of these decisions. What is the sort of legacy that a lot of his decisions are going to leave behind? Because I think that's what people are now beginning to look at. We always look at what a Supreme Court and a president does, but now I think a lot of people are thinking, what is this Attorney General going to leave behind in his wake?
A lot of, I think, abusive behavior towards American businesses, forcing them into settlements for crimes that are dubiously argued or prosecuted. There's an enormous concern on the part of many civil liberties groups about the Justice Department. One of the cases they lost in the Supreme Court 9-0 was Jones versus U.S., in which the Justice Department was arguing that it should have the power to plant a GPS tracking device on your car or the car of any of your viewers without any court order, without any search warrant, without any evidence a crime had been committed. It seems that whether it comes to civil liberties or whether it comes to separation of powers, this administration knows very few boundaries and constantly wants to explore new ones.
Is there a sense that you get, and again, talking to people around Washington as well, that this time he really overstepped himself and there was no reason for him to put himself into this specific discussion, and that we come back again to that racial animus statement that he made?
Well, look, I think the politics of distraction enter into this. I'm not saying that there isn't racial prejudice in the country. Of course there is. But the criticism against Holder is based on legal and procedural and professional grounds, and with very strong specifics, as we cite in our book. For someone to yell race in a crowded political theater is a form of distraction. It means you don't want to deal with the real issues. Why were you overturned by the Supreme Court unanimously 13 times in 2 years? So you mention race and hope that basically everybody chases that rabbit down a hole rather than something that you've really done.
It's interesting, too, how the president has not come out and said anything in response to this. He has remained rather quiet. How did that strike you, that the president has not really said anything in response to all of this controversy?
Well, ever since President Obama got into trouble by questioning a Cambridge cop's treatment of a black professor at Harvard, he's been very leery of making racial pronouncements. I think Eric Holder has been his spokesman on racial issues, saying what the president really thinks, acting as his heat shield for political criticism. If you hear Eric Holder, you're hearing Barack Obama. It's just the president, I think, prefers to have it told through the Attorney General rather than himself.
We talked about the 9th longest tenured Attorney General in history. Where do you think that he will stand right now?
I can tell you right now that Eric Holder will serve until January 20th, 2017. That's the day Barack Obama leaves office. And the reason is very simple. It would be almost impossible to get someone confirmed in the Republican Senate that may come starting in November. Certainly too late to confirm someone this time, this year. And that would be a very awkward situation for President Obama to have to go through a confirmation battle. Secondly, if Eric Holder were to leave the Justice Department, he would lose all the protections the Justice Department affords him in fighting subpoenas and congressional demands for his testimony. He would have a new occupation if he left as Attorney General. And that occupation would be permanent witness. I don't think he wants to be that.
And the occupation will be fighting subpoenas and having lawyers involved in your life for the next 30, 40 years and beyond.
Permanent witness.
Permanent witness, a very good way to put it. John, you put it all right in perspective. Thank you so much for joining us, John. It's a pleasure. We'll do it again.
Pleasure.
All right, John Fund joining us. And again, Eric Holder makes his statements. He made a few more in the last couple of days, and people are wondering if the president will say anything. I think he said it very well. I don't think the president will say much at all at this point. Still ahead, the American automaker that gives no one a really good reason to trust them, no matter how many times they keep asking you to trust them. It's coming up next, right here on MidPoint.